Single dad meets his coworker crying at a cafe. What he said changed both their lives forever. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Evan Harper was sitting in a corner booth at Magnolia Cafe in Omaha on a Saturday morning in late October, trying to make sense of the logistics spreadsheet his boss had dumped on him Friday afternoon with a deadline of Monday. And his 8-year-old son Mason was next to him, completely absorbed in some game on his tablet, making occasional explosion noises that Evan had learned to tune out years ago. The cafe was one of those local spots that hadn't been gentrified yet, still had the original vinyl booths from the 80s, and served coffee in actual ceramic mugs instead of paper cups. And Evan came here most weekends because Mason liked their chocolate chip pancakes, and Evan could get work done without his apartment feeling like it was closing in on him. He was circling his third inventory error when Mason tugged on his sleeve and said in that stage whisper kids do, that's somehow louder than their regular voice, "Dad, that lady from your work is over there, and I think she's crying." Evan looked up and followed Mason's gaze to a booth across the cafe, and sure enough, there was Tessa Nguyen from the warehouse sitting alone with her shoulders hunched forward and her hand covering her face in that universal pose of someone trying really hard not to fall apart in public. Tessa worked in inventory analysis, which meant Evan saw her maybe twice a week in passing, knew she was good at her job because the reports she generated actually made sense, unlike most data people, and that she always said good morning in the break room even when everyone else was too caffeinated and grumpy to bother. They weren't friends exactly, more like friendly coworkers who'd exchange small talk about weather or weekend plans, but never anything deeper, which made seeing her cry in public feel like witnessing something he wasn't supposed to see. His first instinct was to mind his own business, because getting involved in other people's emotional breakdowns was a good way to make things weird at work. But Mason was still staring at Tessa with this concerned expression and said, "Shouldn't we check if she's okay? You always tell me when someone's sad we should ask if they need help." And Evan realized his kid had been paying more attention to his parenting lectures than he'd thought. He told Mason to stay put and walked over to Tessa's booth, cleared his throat quietly so he wouldn't startle her, and when she looked up, her eyes were red and her makeup was smudged, and she looked absolutely mortified to be seen like this. "Tessa? Hey, you okay?" Evan asked, even though it was obviously a stupid question, and Tessa tried to wipe her face and put on a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Oh my God, Evan, I'm fine. Just having a moment. Sorry you had to see this," Tessa said, and her voice was doing that thing where it's trying to sound normal but keeps cracking at the edges, and Evan made a split-second decision that was either going to be helpful or make Monday morning incredibly awkward. "Mind if I sit for a second?" Mason's good for another few minutes with his tablet, and before Tessa could say no, he slid into the booth across from her, and she looked like she couldn't decide if she was relieved or wanted him to disappear. Evan glanced back at Mason, who was watching them, gave him a thumbs up that meant stay there, and Mason went back to his game, looking satisfied that his dad was handling the sad lady situation. They sat in silence for a minute while Tessa tried to compose herself, and Evan tried to figure out what to say. And finally, she let out this shaky breath and said, "I just got a call from the adoption agency. They're rejecting my application. Again, this is the third time in 3 years, and I'm out of options." Evan felt that statement land in his chest because he hadn't known Tessa was trying to adopt, hadn't known anything about her life really beyond her work persona, and the raw pain in her voice was the kind you can't fake. "They said because I'm single, and my income is classified as unstable even though I've had the same job for 6 years, and I'm 34, which apparently is getting up there in their opinion. I don't meet their requirements for a suitable placement," Tessa continued, and she was crying again, not bothering to hide it anymore. "I've wanted to be a mom for as long as I can remember, and I've done everything right, stable job, good home, clean background check, and it's still not enough. I'm never going to be someone's mom, and I don't know how to accept that." Evan sat there looking at this woman he barely knew, who was falling apart over wanting something he'd taken for granted. And instead of giving her some meaningless platitude about how it would work out or everything happens for a reason, he told her something true. "5 years ago, my wife left me and Mason, just walked out one day when he was 3 years old, And she told me being a mom made her feel like she was drowning, like she'd lost herself completely and couldn't breathe, Evan said, and watched Tessa's eyes widen because this wasn't what she'd expected him to say. She moved to Arizona, didn't fight for custody, didn't look back, and I spent years being furious at her for abandoning us, for choosing herself over our kid. And I built my whole identity around being the dad who stayed, who didn't give up, who sacrificed everything. He paused and rubbed his face. But last year, Mason asked me why I never smile in any of our photos, and I looked at all these pictures from the past 5 years and realized he was right. I looked angry or exhausted or just blank in every single one, and I understood that I've been so focused on being mad at his mom for leaving that I forgot to actually show up for him in the way that matters. Tessa was staring at him now, tears still on her face, but she'd stopped crying, and Evan kept going because he'd started this and might as well finish. You're sitting here crying in a cafe because you want to be a mom so badly it's breaking your heart. And my son has a dad who's been emotionally half checked out for years because I let anger eat up all the space where joy should have been. Wanting something doesn't automatically make you worthy of it, but showing up does. And Tessa, you're already showing up. You care this much about something you don't even have yet. Tessa's voice came out small. But what if I never get it? What if I'm one of those people who want something their whole life and it just never happens? And Evan leaned back in the booth. I don't know if you'll be a mom someday, adoption or otherwise. I can't promise you that. But I know you'd be a damn good one because you're sitting here falling apart over the possibility of caring for a kid who isn't even in your life yet. That's not nothing, Tessa. That matters. They sat in silence again, but it felt different this time. Less awkward and more like two people who'd accidentally gotten real with each other and were trying to figure out what to do with that. Mason appeared at the edge of their booth holding a muffin on a napkin. Dad said I could get one. Do you want to share, Miss Tessa? You always say sharing makes people feel better. And Evan felt proud because his 8-year-old had actually been listening to all those little lessons. Tessa looked at Mason, and something in her face softened. That's really sweet, Mason. Thank you. I'd love to share your muffin. And she broke off a piece while Mason climbed into the booth next to his dad, looking pleased with himself for solving the problem. They sat there for another 10 minutes, Evan finishing his coffee while Mason chattered at Tessa about his tablet game, and she asked questions like she was actually interested. And when they finally got up to leave, Tessa grabbed Evan's arm. Thank you for not just walking past me and for telling me that stuff about your wife. I know that probably wasn't easy, she said, and Evan shrugged. You looked like you needed to hear something real instead of something nice. And honestly, saying it out loud helped me too. I hadn't really admitted that stuff about being checked out. They stood there in that awkward space where two coworkers have just shared way too much personal information and now have to figure out how to interact at work on Monday. And finally, Tessa said, "See you Monday?" And Evan nodded. "Yeah, see you Monday." And they walked out to their separate cars. Evan drove home with Mason in the back seat and couldn't stop thinking about how he just told a near stranger the truth about his parenting failures in a cafe on a random Saturday. And somehow it felt like the most honest he'd been with anyone, including himself, in the past 5 years. Monday morning hit, and Evan walked into the warehouse half expecting things to be weird with Tessa after their cafe breakdown session. And sure enough, when he passed her in the hallway near the break room, she gave him this tight smile and said, "Hey," in a voice that was trying way too hard to sound normal before she practically speed-walked in the opposite direction, like she was being chased by her own embarrassment. Evan told himself that was fine. They'd had a vulnerable moment on Saturday, and now it was over, and they could go back to being polite strangers who occasionally nodded at each other near the coffee machine. But apparently the universe had other plans, because by Wednesday his boss had assigned him to a project that required working directly with Tessa's inventory reports, which meant they ended up in a conference room together for 2 hours going over spreadsheets and discrepancy data. The first 30 minutes were painfully professional, with both of them using their best work voices in avoiding eye contact, until Tessa made some offhand comment about their boss's habit of sending emails at 2 in the morning, like the rest of them were also awake and working, and Evan laughed for real without thinking about it. Something shifted after that laugh. The tension broke just enough that they could actually have a normal conversation. And by the time they finished the meeting, they were talking like regular coworkers instead of two people who'd accidentally bonded over coffee and muffins. The next day, Evan walked into the break room at noon to heat up his leftover pasta and found Tessa already there unpacking her lunch. And when she saw him, she hesitated for just a second before saying, "You can sit here if you want. I mean, if you're eating here anyway." And Evan sat down across from her, thinking this was either going to be fine or spectacularly awkward. It ended up being fine. More than fine, actually. They talked about work drama and the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday and how Tessa's car was making a noise that probably meant something expensive was about to break. And by Friday, they'd fallen into this unspoken routine of eating lunch together in the break room at the same time. The conversations stayed surface level for the first week, safe topics like weather and weekend plans and complaints about traffic on I-80. But then one day Tessa asked how Mason was doing, and something in how she asked it made Evan actually answer honestly instead of giving the automatic "he's good" response he usually gave people. He asked me over the weekend why we never do anything fun anymore, said all we do is school and homework and errands, and I realized he's right. We've stopped doing stuff just because it's enjoyable, Evan said while pushing his rice around his container, and Tessa leaned forward with genuine interest. "When did you stop doing fun things?" she asked, and Evan had to think about it. "Probably around the time his mom left. I got so focused on just surviving and making sure he was okay that fun felt like a luxury we couldn't afford, and now it's been 5 years, and I don't even remember what we used to do for fun." Tessa was quiet for a second and then asked a question that landed harder than Evan expected. "Okay, but when's the last time you did something fun? Not Mason, just you. When did you last do something purely because you wanted to and it made you happy?" Evan opened his mouth to answer and came up completely empty. Couldn't think of a single thing he'd done in recent memory that wasn't directly tied to being a parent or keeping his job or basic survival maintenance. And the realization of that hit him like a brick. Meanwhile, Tessa was going through her own transformation, and Evan got to watch it unfold in real time over their lunch conversations. She stopped talking about adoption agencies and rejection letters and started telling him about this volunteer position she'd signed up for at the Boys and Girls Club on the other side of Omaha. "I figured if I can't be someone's official mom right now, I can at least show up for kids who need adults in their corner," she'd explained while eating her salad one Tuesday. And Evan had noticed she looked different when she talked about it, like something heavy had shifted off her shoulders. The first week she'd been nervous about it, worried she wouldn't know what to say or do. But by week 2, she was coming to lunch with stories about the 8th graders she was mentoring, kids dealing with school stress and family drama and trying to figure out who they were in the world. "There's this girl, her name's Kennedy, and she's so smart, but she's convinced she's not college material because nobody in her family has ever gone. And I've been working with her on applications and scholarship essays," Tessa said one day with this light in her eyes that Evan hadn't seen before. "And yesterday she told me she got into UNO with a partial scholarship, and she actually hugged me, like a real hug, and said I was the first person who made her believe she could do it." Evan felt proud of her in a way that surprised him with its intensity. "That's incredible, Tessa. You're literally changing that kid's life." And she smiled but shook her head. "I'm not changing anything. I'm just showing up and listening. But you were right about what you said at the cafe. Showing up matters. These kids don't care if I'm officially anyone's parent. They just care that I remember their names and ask about their lives." 3 weeks into volunteering, and Tessa seemed like a completely different person than the woman who'd been crying in the cafe. She was lighter somehow, more settled in herself. And one day over lunch, Evan told her that. "You seem different, happier maybe. Less like you're carrying something that's crushing you." And Tessa nodded. "I think I finally figured out that I can be enough without the thing I thought would complete me. I was so focused on becoming a mom that I forgot I could just be present for kids without the official title. And it turns out that's actually what I wanted all along. To matter to someone, and I do. I matter to Kennedy and the other kids I mentor." They sat there in comfortable silence for a minute, and Evan thought about how a month ago they barely knew each other, beyond their job titles, and now her happiness made him happy. which felt significant in a way he wasn't ready to examine too closely yet. The friendship kept deepening, and Tessa started asking Evan questions that made him uncomfortable in the way that means they're hitting something true. Like when she asked, "What do you actually enjoy doing? What makes you feel like yourself instead of just Mason's dad?" And Evan had to sit with that for a while before answering. "I used to play basketball at the rec center, had a regular pickup game on Tuesday nights with the same group of guys. I loved it. The competition and the trash talk and just the feeling of my body doing something it was good at," Evan said, and Tessa's eyebrows went up. "Used to? When did you stop?" And Evan shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, even though it kind of was. "When Mason's mom left, I was suddenly a single parent, and Tuesday nights turned into bedtime routine nights. And I told myself I'd get back to it eventually, but eventually just never came." Tessa set down her fork and looked at him directly. "Evan, I'm going to say something, and you might get defensive, but I need you to hear it. You didn't stop playing basketball because you didn't have time. You stopped because you made being a dad your entire personality and convinced yourself that doing things for yourself made you selfish." Evan felt his jaw tighten because she was right, and he knew it. "I'm a single parent. Sacrifice is part of the job description." But Tessa wasn't letting him off that easy. "Sacrifice doesn't mean erasing yourself completely. You can't teach Mason how to live a full life if you're not living one yourself. You're showing him that becoming a parent means giving up everything that makes you who you are. Is that really what you want him to learn?" That conversation stayed with Evan for days. And the next Tuesday, he found himself driving to the rec center after he'd put Mason to bed at his mom's place, walking into the gym where he used to play feeling like an imposter after years away. The regular group was still there, some of the same guys plus a few new faces, and they welcomed him back like he'd only been gone a week instead of 5 years. And Evan spent 2 hours playing basketball and remembering what it felt like to be good at something that had nothing to do with parenting. He came home sweaty and exhausted and happier than he'd been in months. And when he told Tessa about it the next day at lunch, she grinned. "See? You're allowed to be a person. Wild concept, I know." And Evan had thrown a napkin at her, but he was smiling. Mason noticed the change immediately, asked one Tuesday evening, "Why are you so happy today, Dad? You're like singing while you make dinner. You never do that." And Evan tried to explain that taking care of yourself made you better at taking care of other people. And Mason had just said, "Cool, can we get pizza instead of that chicken thing?" Like his dad had just dropped some profound wisdom, and now it was time to move on. Evan started going to the rec center every Tuesday, made it a non-negotiable part of his week, and he felt pieces of himself coming back that he'd forgotten existed. The part that liked competition and physical activity and having friends outside of work. And he realized Tessa had given him permission to be whole again just by asking the right questions. Somewhere in the middle of all this growth and lunch conversations and honest talks, Evan started developing feelings for Tessa that went way beyond friendship or coworker camaraderie, and he was pretty sure she felt something too based on how she'd touch his arm when she laughed or how they'd started texting each other at night about random stuff that didn't matter just because they wanted to keep talking. There were moments that felt charged with possibility, like when their hands would brush, reaching for the same napkin, or when they'd catch each other staring and look away too quickly. And Evan kept thinking about asking her on a real date, but something held him back. Some combination of fear and not wanting to mess up the friendship they'd built. It all came crashing down on a Wednesday in early December. They were having lunch, and Evan had made some comment about how much he genuinely enjoyed spending time with her, how she'd become one of his favorite parts of his week, and Tessa got this look on her face that Evan couldn't quite read, like she was sad and scared at the same time. "Evan, I need to say something, and it's probably going to sound harsh, but I need you to hear me," she started, and Evan felt his stomach drop because nothing good ever started with those words. "I can't be someone's consolation prize. I've spent 3 years being told I'm not enough by adoption agencies. I'm not doing that in my personal life, too. I won't be the woman you fall for because she's convenient or safe or good with your kid." The words hit Evan like cold water. "What are you talking about, Tessa? That's not how I see you." But even as he said it, he wondered if there was some truth to what she was saying. If part of his growing feelings were tied up in how natural and easy she was with Mason the few times they had interacted. Tessa's voice was shaking but determined. You're an incredible dad, Evan, and I'm good with kids, and it would be really easy for you to fall for me because I'd fit into your life perfectly. I'd be good for Mason, but I need to be chosen because someone actually wants me, not because I'm good at filling a role you need filled. I've been the wrong fit too many times and I can't do it again. She stood up and grabbed her lunch container. I think we need to keep things professional from here on out. This friendship was getting too close to something else, and I need distance before I get hurt. And Evan tried to argue, tried to tell her she had it wrong, but she was already walking away. And he sat there in the empty break room, feeling like he'd just lost something important before he'd fully understood what it was. The next 2 weeks were absolutely brutal. Evan and Tessa went back to being strangers who happened to work in the same building. Polite nods in the hallway and nothing else. And Evan felt her absence in every lunch break he ate alone. He could tell she was hurting too, would catch glimpses of her across the warehouse floor, looking just as miserable as he felt. But neither of them knew how to bridge the gap she'd created. Mason noticed something was off and asked multiple times why Miss Tessa didn't eat lunch with them anymore, and Evan had to keep explaining that grown-ups sometimes needed space. But his son just looked at him with those two knowing 8-year-old eyes and said, "You're sad, though. You're doing that thing where you smile but your eyes don't." And Evan realized he couldn't hide anything from this kid who saw right through him. Evan spent a full week rehearsing what he wanted to say to Tessa before he finally worked up the courage to actually approach her. And when he caught her in the warehouse parking lot after their shift on a Friday evening in mid-December, he was pretty sure his heart was going to beat out of his chest. "Tessa, can we talk?" "Not here. Maybe at Miller Park. Just 20 minutes, please," he said, and tried not to sound as desperate as he felt. And Tessa looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay, I'll meet you there in 10. The drive to the park felt like it took 3 hours, even though it was less than 5 minutes. And when Evan pulled into the parking lot, Tessa was already there, sitting on one of the benches near the empty playground, and the December cold was making her breath visible in little clouds. Evan sat down next to her, but left space between them. And for a minute, neither of them said anything. They just watched the sun setting behind the bare trees. And finally, Evan took a breath and just started talking before he could lose his nerve. "You said you didn't want to be a consolation prize, that you wouldn't be the woman I dated because she's good with Mason. And you were right to call that out. You were right to protect yourself," Evan said, and Tessa turned to look at him. "But I need you to know something, and I need you to actually hear it. I'm not looking for a mom for Mason. He has me. We're good. We're figuring it out. What I'm looking for is someone who makes me want to show up for my own life again." Tessa's expression shifted, but she didn't interrupt. So Evan kept going. "For 5 years, I've been hiding behind being a dad, using it as an excuse to not have friends or hobbies or any kind of life that wasn't directly related to Mason, and I convinced myself that was noble or sacrificial or whatever, but really I was just scared." He rubbed his hands together against the cold. "My ex-wife left because she said being a mom made her lose herself, and I was so angry at her for that, so determined to prove I was the better parent that I did the exact same thing. I lost myself completely, and then you showed up at that cafe crying, and I told you the truth about being checked out, and you didn't let me get away with it." Tessa's eyes were getting wet, but Evan needed to finish this. "You've been challenging me since that day, asking me hard questions, pushing me to remember I'm allowed to be a person and not just a parent. You made me start playing basketball again. You made me realize Mason deserves a dad who's actually present, not just physically there. And Tessa, none of that has anything to do with you being good with kids. That's all about you being good for me." Tessa wiped her eyes. "Evan, I appreciate that. But how do you know? How do we know this isn't just, I don't know, trauma bonding or something? We both had hard stuff going on and we helped each other. But that doesn't mean we should be together." Evan shifted closer. "You're right. Helping each other doesn't automatically mean romance. But Tessa, I'm not falling for you because you helped me. I'm falling for you because you're funny and you call me on my bullshit and you get this look on your face when you're concentrating on spreadsheets that makes me want to make you laugh. I like you for who you are, not for what you can do for my kid." He could see her processing that, wanting to believe it but scared too. "What about Mason, though? You can't separate him from the equation. If we do this, he's part of it. And what if I mess it up? What if I'm too much or not enough or he ends up hating me? Evan took her hand and she didn't pull away. Mason already likes you. You know that. But here's the thing. You don't have to be his mom or fill any specific role. You just have to be you and let him figure out what that means to him. And if it doesn't work out, then we handle it like adults and make sure he's okay. Tessa let out this shaky laugh. You make it sound so simple. And Evan squeezed her fingers. It's not simple. It's actually probably going to be complicated and messy, but I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to tell you how I feel. They sat in silence and Evan could see her working through it, all the fear and doubt and hope mixed together. And finally, she turned to face him completely. I need to tell you something too, and it's not easy to admit, Tessa started, and her voice was shaking. I've spent 3 years thinking that becoming a mom would complete me, that I was broken or incomplete without it, and I let that consume everything, my identity, my self-worth, all of it. Evan nodded and let her talk. And then you showed up at the cafe and told me showing up matters more than wanting, and I started volunteering with those kids, and Evan, I found something I didn't even know I was missing. I found out that I'm already enough, that I don't need a title or a role to validate my existence. Tessa took a shaky breath. But that realization made me terrified of you. Because what if I was using you and Mason to get close to that mom feeling? What if I was making you a consolation prize without even realizing it? What if my motives weren't pure? She wiped her face again. I've been so scared that I don't know how to want someone just for them, that everything's tied up in this need to nurture or mother or whatever. And I convinced myself that pulling away from you was protecting both of us. Evan turned her face gently so she was looking at him. And now? What do you think now? And Tessa's voice came out barely above a whisper. Now I think I don't need Mason to feel whole. I want you. And yeah, he's part of you. And that matters, but Evan, I have feelings for you that have nothing to do with him. I like how you make terrible jokes when you're nervous. I like how you actually listen when I talk instead of just waiting for your turn. I like who I am when I'm around you. And that's not about filling a void, it's just about wanting to be with someone who sees me. Evan felt his throat get tight. So what are you saying, Tessa? And she smiled through her tears. I'm saying I'm scared, but I want to try. I want to see where this goes. I want to stop protecting myself from something good just because I'm afraid it might hurt. Evan kissed her then, soft and careful and full of all the things he didn't have words for, and when they pulled apart, Tessa laughed. That was wow. Okay, we're doing this. And Evan grinned. Yeah, we're doing this. No more running, no more overthinking, just two people who are going to figure it out as they go. They sat on that bench until the park lights came on and made plans for an actual date. Dinner at a real restaurant without work or Mason or any other buffers. Just them choosing each other on purpose. 3 months later, Evan and Tessa were the kind of couple that made their coworkers either really happy or mildly annoyed depending on the day. And they'd navigated the complicated parts of blending a relationship with single parenting by being honest about everything and checking in constantly. Tessa had maintained clear boundaries with Mason. She wasn't trying to be his mom, and he seemed perfectly fine with her just being Tessa, the adult who taught him card tricks and didn't mind when he talked about video games for 20 minutes straight. Evan had continued his Tuesday basketball nights, and Tessa had doubled down on her volunteering, and they both learned that being good together didn't mean sacrificing the things that made them good separately. On a Saturday morning in late March, they ended up back at Magnolia Café, same booth where this whole thing had started. And Mason was at Evan's mom's house for the weekend, so it was just the two of them. Tessa was stirring her coffee and smiling at something on her phone when Evan said, "You know what you told me that day the first time we sat here?" And Tessa looked up. "I told you a lot of things that day, most of them while crying into a napkin." Evan laughed. "You said you were never going to be someone's mom, and I told you that wanting it didn't make you worthy, but showing up did. Remember?" Tessa nodded. "Yeah, I remember. Why are you bringing that up?" Evan leaned forward. "Because you've been showing up, Tessa, for those kids at the club, for me, for Mason when it's natural. And you know what I figured out? You were already a mom to those kids the second you decided they mattered. Titles don't make you something you already are. Tessa's eyes got wet. Evan, thank you. I needed to hear that. And he took her hand across the table. But I also need you to know something else. I'm not with you because you're good with Mason or good with kids or because you fill some role I needed filled. I'm with you because you make me want to be better. Not better at parenting, better at being myself. You gave me permission to be a whole person again. Tessa squeezed his fingers. You did the same thing for me. You told me the truth when I needed it, even though it was hard, and that changed everything. They sat there in their booth while the cafe filled up with the Saturday morning crowd. And Evan thought about how 5 months ago he'd been going through the motions of his life, being a dad but not really being present. And Tessa had been falling apart over feeling incomplete. And one honest conversation had set them both on completely different paths. You know what the crazy part is? Tessa said. If the adoption agency had said yes, I probably wouldn't have been at this cafe that day. I wouldn't have been crying. You wouldn't have sat down. None of this would have happened. Evan considered that. So you're saying getting rejected led you to this? And Tessa smiled. I'm saying sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning. You just can't see it yet because you're too close to the pain. Sometimes the person who changes your life isn't the one who fixes your problems or fills your empty spaces. It's the one who tells you the truth. You need to hear even when it hurts. And sometimes that truth is that you're already enough exactly as you are. Evan wasn't looking to rescue anyone when he walked up to Tessa's table that day. And Tessa wasn't looking for someone to complete her. But they found each other anyway in the middle of their respective struggles and gave each other permission to be whole. If this story reminded you that honest conversations can change everything, and that sometimes being enough for yourself is the first step to being good with someone else, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you believe one conversation can change your entire life. We love hearing your stories. Thanks for being here with us. And remember that showing up matters more than wanting. Truth matters more than comfort. And sometimes the person crying at a cafe becomes the person who helps you remember how to smile in photos again.